During the final exam weeks, you'll be presenting your final presentation for the academic speaking skills course. Make sure that you make your reservation as soon as the system starts operating so that you can have the luxury of choosing the date and the session that best fits your final exam schedule or conforms to your personal priorities. Before the final presentation date, it's a very good idea to have a friend go through your slides to see if there are any unclear or ambiguous points, or spelling or grammar mistakes. It is possible that computer programs misinterpret correctly spelled words as mistakes, or vice versa. It is also suggested that you rehearse and time your presentation. One very practical way to reflect on your own performance is to record it on your phone and watch yourself. Don't forget to bring your presentation audiovisual files, usually PowerPoint slides, on a USB on the presentation day with you. Make sure to have your file on an online file sharing system too, such as Google Drive or Dropbox. At the very least, email them to yourself to be able to access them in case of emergency. The evolutionary adaptation theory claims that we tend to make judgments about people's performances in the first 3 seconds to decide whether they're friends or foes. Similarly, in a presentation, even in the first 3 or more seconds in your introduction, you leave the audience with an impression of your overall potential performance, which might affect the audience's perception of you in the rest of the presentation. Unfortunately, this is also the part of the presentation during which you might be dealing with your stage fright. No matter how excited you may be, you should try to look at the audience and not your note cards when you're introducing yourself and announcing your topic. And do so with a pleasant attitude. The sign of good communication is the response that it elicits. A pleasant attitude will elicit far more positive immediate feedback from the audience, which will make you feel better and more welcome when presenting. Make sure that your teaser is directly relevant to your content or can at least be smoothly integrated to the rest of your presentation. Most student presentations start with a very interesting attention-grabbing technique like an anecdote, imagery, a question, or a picture, but then are suddenly interrupted with the introduction of the outline before the audience can relate your teaser to your subject matter. Similarly, your concluding message should be integrated to the rest of your conclusion. Most students read out a very effective slogan or anticipation or wish in a very dull voice and abruptly finish their talk by inviting questions. The audience is left puzzled, not knowing how the final remarks are related to the rest of the presentation. It is advisable that your outline include both your topic and its 2 subtopics, but not the details of those subtopics, since you do not want to overwhelm your audience at the very start of your presentation. Make sure that you use appropriate signposts, especially when starting to deal with your subtopics. It's a very good idea to include reference information on your slides. It will remind you to cite your sources orally, and the source of the information will be credited. Think of how you feel when you're a member of an audience. Talking in a nerdy way, using complex structures, making use of a lot of terminology are discouraging for a general audience. Simplify your content to adapt it to a general audience. In your final presentation, you will not be addressing experts in the field, but the general audience only. I can't overemphasize the use of different tones of voice which agree with your content. Even if you memorize your talk, sound as if you're improvising, not reading from a text, but speaking spontaneously. Your vocal usage determines your credibility. Universally, people respect authenticity, enthusiasm, and the desire to communicate something of value to the audience, not a monotonous tone of voice which sounds like you're reading information one can Google and find out in 5 minutes. An average speaker is afraid to pause. A short pause brings words to life. It conveys confidence. Therefore, do not rush when presenting. A brief pause will give you time to regulate your breath and give your audience time to comprehend what you have just said. In a presentation, your language should be spoken language. Trying to impress your audience with fancy, complex sentences full of technical, scholarly, academic terminology will cause you to sound bookish. The reason you're presenting is because you want to convey your message effectively, not because you want to impress your audience and still leave them with a confused mind about what you've just talked about. Try to use simple sentences that one can understand as you speak, since the audience would not like to interrupt you and ask you to rephrase the unclear parts. So avoid written language in a spoken presentation. Just like your language, your slides should also be simple enough to be understood immediately during the seconds that you're presenting them. Now one goes back to them and thinks over them, highlighting certain points and checking some words in a dictionary. When watching a presentation, one doesn't have the luxury of contemplating one single visual. Your visuals should be meaningful when presented, not if they're printed out as a textbook. Also, do not show any items or images before you refer to them in your presentation, because your audience may read ahead and be distracted by them before you refer to them. So, it's a very good idea to use animation to make items on your slides appear one by one at a click of the mouse as you refer to them. You might have audio problems if you do not check the speakers beforehand. It's also very common that the video on your slide doesn't play for this or that reason. What matters most is how you would deal with such a situation rather than the content of your video. Always have backup plans, like very shortly describing what's in your video if you need to skip it. As a final remark, please make sure that you do not point to the slide with your hand blocking the very same slide that you want your audience to look at. Instead, point to the exact place you want your audience to look at with your laser pointer. Check your laser pointer and try it out before the presentation, of course. If you pay particular attention to these warnings about the most common mistakes students make when presenting, there is no reason why you cannot present effectively.